Hi, I'm Stephen Paul, and welcome to the land of Israel, God's story. This is going to be an extraordinary adventure we go on with Academy Award winner Jon Voight, who's going to tell the greatest stories of the Bible.
Swings it around, and then he lets it go.
We're going to go off-road with a great tour guide, Aaron Schaefer.
That entire compound is called the Temple Mount. Under that massive platform is the peak of Mount Moriah.
And two extraordinary rabbis, Chaim and Levi Chunin.
The awareness how one man set out to change the entire world from right here.
This is going to be an extraordinary adventure. We're in the land of miracles. Israel, welcome to it. And let's go.
Hi, I'm Jon Voight, and my great passion is stories. My dad was a great storyteller, and I eventually, because of that, wound up in movies. And as I grew older, I became more and more spiritual about the way I looked at things. I learned a lot of lessons in my life, and I found my way to the company of great people, all very, very spiritual folks. And I said, why don't we do the story of the land of Israel? It's a story that people assume they know, but really don't know. And my passion for it comes, I feel it has an answer for everything. This wonderful story from the time of Abraham. It's the most amazing story. I think it's a fundamental story to all our beliefs. And I wanted so much for people to understand it because it makes a big, big difference in the way we view the world, the way we view Israel. It's a powerful story. So come with us on this journey, this daunting journey, because it is finally God's story. And so we pray that we will have the wisdom to tell this story well. And we have the help of course, many souls who are not with us any longer, who gave their lives to the examination and the illumination of this Bible story. The great Einsteins of the Jewish people, prior to the present day, were all rabbis, and they were all focused on the Bible and examining and illuminating the words of the Bible, the stories of the Bible. And because of these great ones, we have the Talmud, and we have the Midrash, which is the oral traditions which illuminate the stories and the verses of the Bible. And we also have the land. Extraordinary wealth of energy comes from the land itself. Every stone has a story here. So let's enter into our journey.
I don't think that the Bible mentions explicitly that he spoke to him.
Here.
I don't think that it mentions that he spoke to him explicitly here.
I can't explain the energy that I'm feeling here. Hi, my name is Stephen Paul. We are doing a show called The Land of Israel, God's Story. My dear friend, Jon Voight, for 20 plus years, has telling me more about Israel and the story of the Jews and the connection of God and Israel. And I'm a Jew and I haven't known anything about this. So we have this extraordinary team accompanying Jon now. And Jon's going to ask all these questions that he knows, and we're going to see actually who knows more, the rabbis or Jon. Start your bets now.
Over to you, Aaron. Let's go on this journey.
Thank you, Jon. Almost 4,000 years ago, one man named Abram set out on a journey that would change the world forever. At the age of 75 years old, God revealed himself to Abram and told him, go out from your land to the place that I will show you. And Abram went out on a journey blindly following the voice of God until he came here, Shechem. And here he understood that he had arrived in the land that God had promised to give to him and his descendants. And he built an altar and he worshiped God here. Came from southern Turkey, from the land called Haran in the Bible, and he arrived here in the land of Israel. And this is the beginning of the journey of Abram and his children and grandchildren that ultimately became the people of Israel in the land of Israel, a journey that's been going on for almost 4,000 years. We're standing over the ancient city of Shechem. We are standing now on Mount Gerizim. On the other side of the valley, we have Mount Eval, and the city of Shechem is down below. This is where Abraham stopped, and this is where he built an altar to serve his God for the first time in the land that God had promised him.
He promised him the land.
Yeah.
That's not written here.
I said that. I said he arrived in the land that God had promised him.
Yeah, but that's not exactly right.
It's not saying, the truth is that the explicit promise, no, it is. Go out from your land and come to a place that I will show you, and you will be a blessing, and in you will be blessed all the people of the earth. It's not an explicit promise.
This is what this show is going to be about. You're going to see 4 rabbis and John questioning everything about the Bible and saying, wait a second, was that right? And we'll be right back after a word from one of our sponsors. And welcome back to the land of Israel, God's story.
God repeats the process.
Let's continue on the journey.
Each time he gets more specific and more explicit. When Abraham came into the land, he wasn't the only one that was here. There were already a people who lived in the land that would later be called Israel. They were called the Canaanites. John.
Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great oak tree at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land.
Could you maybe give a little bit of background about, I think it's important, who the Canaanites were?
Who were the Canaanites?
Canaanites were, but the lifestyle.
Who were they?
As we go through, these things will become more evident. It builds. We're throwing it out there.
Like the dog.
And the subsequent scenes, this will build. They'll have encounters with the Canaanites. So we just want to throw it out there.
We're going to get a description of what the Canaanites are. Some of you have heard Canaanites. It has nothing to do with the dogs. It's not canines. Canaanites. You're going to hear about what the Canaanites are. Stand by.
In Abraham's days, there was a major empire south of here in Egypt. The pharaohs had ruled for thousands of years. Already at that time, they were the most developed civilization in the world. And in this land, what today is the land of Israel, at that time it was called the land of Canaan. And there were 7 nations that together are called the Canaanites. And they were basically organized as city-states. So every local king would build a city with a wall around it that might house a few hundred up to 1,000 people or something of that order. And then he would sort of become the feudal lord of all the farmers and the villagers and the nomads who lived in the territory under his control. So every city was like its own kingdom, like a city-state with its own king. And eventually Shechem also had a city with a king that we'll learn about in the time of Jacob. But when Abraham came here, as far as we know, there wasn't yet any city built here.
I think it's appropriate that as we embark upon this journey of telling God's story in the land of Israel, that we're doing it at the very spot and location where Abraham's journey began.
Right.
And
It's the first time he came to Israel.
first time he came to this land.
His land. Yeah.
And I believe it's the case that all of us, except for Aaron, are at this place for the very first time in our lives.
Yes.
So it's quite apropos that we begin this great, joyous journey at this very space.
Right.
It's my honor to show it to you guys.
I want to read the first words that Abram, this human being who knew God from an early age and grew up in a sea of people who were idol worshippers and in bad behavior, and he recognized there was one God, and he tried to teach everybody as he grew older. And Abram was visited when he was 75 years old with God's voice. And God said to him, I want you, Abram, I want you to go from your country, your people, and your father's household to a land I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you. And this was the beginning of this journey to the land that we now call Israel. This was the beginning. Many years later, Abraham's grandson, Jacob, returned to Shechem with his family, Aaron, and there was a very disturbing event that happened. Isn't that right?
So now Jacob is back in the land. After 20 years in the house of his uncle Laban, he returns now with 2 wives, 2 concubines, 11 sons, and 1 daughter. And here he is supposed to find a way to carry out the mission that God has entrusted to him to establish a people in the land. And he comes here to Shechem, the first place that Abraham, his grandfather, came to many years before him. And when he arrives to this place, in the time since Abraham, a new local king had built a city here. He walled in an area, he built palaces and houses. The man's name was Hamor. He was the king of the area. Hamor had an oldest son by the name of Shechem, and Hamor named the city after his oldest son Shechem. So you can imagine that this boy Hamor, who had the city named after him, and all the villages around are paying taxes to the city named after him, you can imagine that he probably wasn't the most humble and friendly character. Well, Jacob has a challenge to keep his family separate from the local Canaanites, who are pagans, who are idol worshippers, who have character traits which are maybe not the kind that he wants his children to learn from. And so instead of asking to move into the city, the walled city, where Hamor and his son Shechem live, he purchases a plot of land just outside the city over here. He pays money. The Bible tells us how much he paid. 100 coins that in that day were called kasita, which was a measure of money. He purchases a plot of land and he sets up his camp. He, his 2 wives, his 2 concubines, his 11 sons and his 1 daughter. And his mission is to keep them separate. But he has only 1 daughter and 11 sons. Her name is Dinah. And imagine one girl, she's from the youngest. She has no one to talk to. She has no one to be friends with. And even though Jacob warns his family to stay away from the locals, Dinah can't help herself. She ventures out of the camp into the walled city of Shechem, seeking out girls her age to be friends with, to talk with. While she's there, Shechem sees her and falls in love with her. But he's used to getting what he wants. So instead of approaching her father and asking if maybe he could court her for marriage, he takes her by force. And now his family has to, for the first time, confront this hostility and this situation in the land. Their most precious thing, their only daughter of the whole family, was taken by force by the local people here in the land.
And with that said, we'll be right back. And welcome back to the land of Israel, God's story.
Sometime later, Shechem decided that he actually wanted to marry Dinah. And so he came to her family, he left the city, and he went to the field where Dinah's family was camped, and he approached the family saying, "I would like to marry your daughter." Jacob, her father, doesn't know what to do. He has a problem. He is only one man with his wives and his children, and they are the ones that hold all the power in their hand, and they want to marry his daughter. If he says no, it's an insult. Shechem, sensing that Jacob is hesitant, says to Jacob, "What would you like me to do to make you comfortable? We're willing to pay any price. We're willing to meet any terms to marry your daughter." And that's when Jacob's 2 sons, Simon and Levi, they step in and they say to Shechem, "We have a condition if you want to marry our sister. Among us, Israelites, they're not yet called Israelites, but among us in our religion, every male has to be circumcised. This is a covenant that goes back to our grandfather Abraham. If we're going to marry our sister Dinah to you, Shechem, you need to be circumcised. But not only you, your father and your brothers and all of your family, and actually all the people of the city of Shechem, need to be circumcised. And then we'll be willing to marry our sister to you. So Shechem immediately agrees, and he says, we will all circumcise. And so they went back to their city, and Shechem and Hamor and all the people of the city of Shechem, they all circumcised themselves. But then on the third day, when they were in pain and when they were trying to recover from this operation that they underwent, Simon and Levi had a plan. They went in with swords into the city while everyone were in bed, and they killed every person in the city. When the word got back to their father Jacob, Jacob was furious. He said, you're making an embarrassment of us in the land, and now everyone is going to attack us. We're going to be vulnerable. But Shimon and Levi, they respond simply, shall our sister be like a harlot? And with that, the Bible leaves the scene. But now, Jacob decides that he can't stay in this area anymore. He needs to pick up and travel south.
She was taken hostage by Shechem,
Right.
and he asked for marriage. It wasn't like he came to her father's house and said, I'd like to have your daughter. He had her, raped her,
Right.
had her hostage.
Right.
The way you say the story, you really water her down. I'm just saying, I feel like
I think this is good stuff for sitting down and
It
talking.
makes it look like the action.
That was his
They
interpretation.
look like they're horrible people.
Why are you getting so upset with them?
My name is Levi, and I take it personally.
Is that what it was? Just because he mentioned the levy, you got upset?
Just a second. Just
What's
a second.
the problem
Where's the
here?
audience?
Separate them. Separate them. This is getting crazy. This is what happens in Israel. God,
You know what I'm saying? I feel like
calm down.
I think it's
Come on, fight him.
Poor Jacob had a lot of drama with his sons. We think of this as a holy family in some way, but what about the story of Joseph and his fate at the hands of his brothers because of envy?
So Joseph sets out on a journey to look for his brothers at the order of his father Jacob. He travels along the mountain range of Judea and Samaria until he arrives here at Shechem, and he starts asking the people, has anyone seen my brothers? I'm looking for my brothers. And they tell him that they went a little bit north from here. So he travels north until he arrives at his brothers, and his brothers see him coming from a distance. And they say, look, here comes that dreamer of dreams. Let's see what will be with him. And they start discussing about what they're going to do. So they come up with a plan to kill him. But then they start to argue among themselves if maybe it's not such a good idea to kill him. Maybe it's better to throw him in a pit. In the end, they decide to throw him in the pit and to wash their hands of him. But then they see a caravan of merchants coming, and they say, wouldn't it be better to sell him to the caravan of merchants? And so they sell their brother as a slave to a caravan of merchants that's going down to Egypt. And so Joseph is carried to Egypt. They then sit down to eat. They slaughter an animal, and they take the blood of the animal, and they dip Joseph's colorful coat that his father gave him in the blood, and they take it back to the father and tell him, this is your son's coat. And Jacob says, Joseph was certainly killed by a wild animal. And from that time on, Jacob mourns his son, Joseph, thinking that he's dead.
Beautiful. What were you
Did I miss
fighting with
anything?
them?
Did I say anything
He
inaccurate?
knows it beautiful.
If I missed it, you'll fill it in the discussion.
I can't believe it.
If I say inaccurate, fill it in the discussion.
You have been watching The Land of Israel, God's story.